You woke up today already behind, not because you overslept or missed something, but because of a specific, low tightening that arrived before the day even asked anything of you. It isn't a crisis. It isn't panic. It's just the quiet, persistent hum of a mind that never fully stopped monitoring. You probably function well under this. You meet the deadlines. You show up for the people who count on you. You handle what needs handling, but you do all of it while carrying something invisible. A mental spreadsheet that never closes, always calculating what's next, always tracking what might slip if you stop watching it. And somewhere along the way, you started calling this your personality. There are 5 shifts in awareness that reduce this kind of stress. Not 5 tasks, not 5 habits to build, 5 things to notice. Because this pattern lives almost entirely in what goes unnoticed. Most stress advice tells you to breathe deeper, to manage your time better, to take breaks. That rarely works for long, because it doesn't address why your brain wants the stress there in the first place. For a high-functioning mind, stress isn't just an unpleasant side effect of a busy life. It becomes a tracking system. Your brain has learned to equate internal pressure with the act of being responsible. When you feel that familiar tightening, a part of your mind quietly registers, good. We're still watching. Nothing has been forgotten. We're still in control. In this state, relaxation doesn't feel like rest. It feels like a lapse. The first shift is simply recognizing this. Stress is not your personality. It is a tracking system your mind built. And like any system, it can be seen for what it is rather than mistaken for who you are. Here is what the cycle looks like from the inside. A responsibility appears. It could be anything. A task, a conversation you haven't had yet, a commitment sitting at the edge of your attention. The mind immediately increases its monitoring. It flags the responsibility. It keeps it active so nothing gets dropped. That monitoring creates tension, a low hum, a sense of being slightly braced. And here is the part that usually goes unnoticed. The tension itself starts to feel like a signal, a confirmation that you're on top of things, that nothing has slipped, that the variables of your life are still being held in place. So the brain doesn't release the tension, because releasing it would feel like losing track. Before one responsibility is resolved, 3 more have entered the queue. The temporary relief at the end of the cycle never quite arrives. Over time, you lose the ability to distinguish between a genuine emergency and the baseline act of existing. Stress becomes the default operating state. And because you haven't failed yet, the brain credits the stress for your stability. It quietly concludes, the only reason things are intact is that I never stopped watching them. Why does the mind maintain stress even when nothing urgent is happening? Because to its internal logic, the stress is what's keeping everything in place. Think about a Sunday that's supposed to be restful. Even then, you're likely scanning, thinking about Monday, wondering if you've prepared enough, checking your own internal state to confirm you're resting correctly so you won't regret it later. The monitoring doesn't stop because the conditions changed. The monitoring is no longer responding to conditions. It's just running. The second shift is noticing when that happens, not stopping it immediately, just catching the moment the mind moves from genuine awareness into automatic scanning. There is a difference between the two, and the difference becomes visible once you know to look for it. This is where the pattern moves from habit into identity. Many people reach a point where they believe they stay stressed because they care, that if the pressure lifted, something in them would go slack, that the tension is somehow proof of their commitment. The identity forms quietly. I'm just someone who handles a lot. I function best under pressure. If I weren't this way, things would fall apart. These don't feel like defenses, and they feel like accurate self-descriptions, but consider what they're actually doing. They're converting a protective pattern into a personality trait. They're making a learned behavior feel like a fixed self. And once a pattern feels like a self, it becomes much harder to examine. The third shift is separating caring from bracing. Caring is real. It belongs to you. The tension attached to it was added later, a layer the mind wrapped around your actual values to keep them feeling secure. But the layer is not the thing itself. Your mind chose vigilance before it chose peace. Not because something is wrong with you, not because you are wired for anxiety, but because at some point, possibly early, possibly gradually, the mind concluded that staying slightly tense was how things stayed intact. It was a reasonable conclusion. It may have even been correct at the time. The problem is that adaptive systems don't automatically update when circumstances change. The monitoring continues. The tension persists, even when the actual threat level is low, even when, by most measures, things are fine. The brain is not malfunctioning. It is running a program it still believes is essential. There is a biological reason the pattern feels so natural. Your mind evolved in an environment of physical threats. In that world, staying braced meant you could respond faster when something dangerous appeared. In modern life, the threats are not predators. They are deadlines, perceived judgment, uncertainty about the future, the inbox that refills before you've finished clearing it. The brain doesn't distinguish easily between these. It uses the same ancient system for a late reply that it once used for a genuine threat. And because modern threats don't appear and then leave, they layer, they persist, they overlap. The stress response that was designed for short acute situations begins running as a background process instead. You aren't catastrophizing. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do, in an environment that gives it very little opportunity to stop. The fourth shift is recognizing vigilance as a learned response rather than a fixed identity. You were not born braced. The bracing was constructed carefully over time in response to real conditions. That means it is a pattern, not a permanent feature of who you are. This is the part worth sitting with slowly. Caring and constant internal tension are not the same behavior. Their responsibility is action. Tension is bracing for a blow that hasn't landed yet. You can complete work with full excellence while having a quiet nervous system. You can show up for the people who matter to you with a clear, still mind. The work gets done either way. The difference is that one version of you finishes the day tired from the work itself. The other finishes the day tired from the monitoring of the work, from the vigilance that ran in the background the entire time, consuming its own quiet portion of everything you had. You were capable first. The stress arrived later and took the credit. Who would you be if responsibility didn't require internal pressure? Not irresponsible, not careless, not someone who lets things slip. Just someone whose nervous system wasn't also working a second shift. And the fifth shift is the most specific. Tomorrow, when you feel that familiar tightening, see if you can catch the thought underneath it. The thought that says, if I don't feel stressed about this, I'm not taking it seriously. Just seeing that thought clearly, recognizing it as a protective strategy rather than a fact, begins to create a small gap. A gap between the task and the pressure applied to it. A gap between who you are and how you learned to protect yourself. You don't have to dismantle the pattern immediately. You don't have to force relaxation or talk yourself out of the tension. You just have to notice the thought before it runs unquestioned. That noticing is not a small thing. It is where everything else begins. If your mind feels tense most days, it is not evidence of weakness. Yet it is evidence that you learned a particular way of staying in control, and that the learning was thorough. Vigilance became a habit. Monitoring became a default. Tension became the signal that things were still being held together. That was not a flaw. That was adaptation. But patterns that protected you once do not always serve the same function later. You are not failing at being calm. You are simply succeeding at a defense you may no longer need.